Today we're at Bristol Cathedral with Mandy Ford, the Dean. And Mandy gives one of the best cathedral tours of anywhere in the UK. So well organized, so well thought out. I really felt like I had a sense of the history of the place and the city and the relations between church people and everybody in the community. Mandy, you're such a talented dean, and we're so grateful for you taking us around. But one of the things that struck me the most in hearing the story of this cathedral is how much of it was constructed in the 19th century. And then also, how do you deal today with monuments and other memorials to people who were involved in slavery and the slave trade?
So just to give you a little bit of background, this building was originally an Augustinian abbey. So we go right back to 800, 1200, something along those lines. And then when Henry VIII came to power and the monasteries were abolished, the cathedral, the abbey as it was closed down completely. And at that point they were in the middle of a building project. So there was a nave, and then there wasn't a nave, and then there was an abbey, and then there wasn't an abbey. And so they walled up what was left of the building, and then a couple of years later the abbey became the cathedral, but it remained the smallest cathedral in England for over 400 years. And where we are sitting now in the nave, there were a little sequence of houses and a main road ran straight past the front door. And then in the Victorian period, so we're talking probably from around 1840 to 1850, the people of Bristol decided they wanted a cathedral that was worthy of their great mercantile trading town. And there's a very entrepreneurial canon, interestingly not the dean, it was one of the other members of the chapter who raised the funds and so built the nave in which we're now sitting, which was built in the Victorian period, but built very much to reflect the style of what was here before, and very sensitively and well done, I think. So we now have this beautiful building to worship in, but we also can imagine that quite a lot of the funding for that second stage of building, as it were, came from people who had earned their money through what we would now see as really horrific exploitation of other human beings. So I came here in 2020, just after the murder of George Floyd, and in a time when the city of Bristol was really coming to terms with its relationship with the slave trade, in particular with one slave trader, merchant, a man called Edward Colston, who had made his money through the Royal Africa Company, which traded in slaves, and then was a huge philanthropist in this city. So there are schools and hospitals, and the big concert hall were all named after Colston, which was really abhorrent to a section of the community that felt that this man was being honoured and aggrandized, who had enslaved their
Right, exactly, their forebears, exactly.
Exactly. So that was a huge challenge to me when I arrived, because I knew that we had some serious work to do around acknowledging that and understanding what it meant for us as a cathedral. And I'm going to start by telling you the story of the plaque which is behind us.
Yes.
So I was approached very early on after I arrived by a fantastic woman called Gloria Daniel. And Gloria is of African Caribbean heritage. And she had traced her ancestry back to a man named John Isaac. And John Isaac was an enslaved African on a plantation that belonged to the Daniel family, the clues in the surname. And the Daniel family had contributed to the building of the nave, and the enormous rose window, which is above our heads now, is dedicated to the family. And there's no philanthropy there. They just made a lot of money and wielded a lot of power.
Yes.
And the Daniel family, at the abolition of slavery, were compensated for over 4,500 lives.
Yeah.
So nobody compensated the enslaved, but the plantation owners were compensated. And Gloria wanted that story to be told in the cathedral. And she had a particular idea about how that might be done. And we had a long conversation about whether that was the right way forward. Because, as I said to her at the time, if I put something under every monument in this building that has a relationship to the slave trade, I don't know, but I can guess that they would be peppered all over the building.
Yes.
And so I said, I want to find out more about how this works in this building. We found an amazing research partner, a woman called Catherine Pryor, who looked at the biographies of all of about 1,000 men and women who were either buried in the cathedral, so they appear in the burial registers, or they're memorialized in the building. Very fortunately, we have a digital archive.
Oh, great.
So there were photographs of all the monuments. You didn't have to come and
Yes,
look at every
single
one. They
space.
were all on the website. And she discovered that about 200 of those 1,000 people had a direct first or second generation link. Either they had been compensated at abolition, because those records are available, or she could find out from their biographies that they had inherited, or they'd lived in Barbados or in Jamaica. And so that was really helpful in understanding the scale of the problem. And I often say to people, you know, if you were middle class in Bristol in the 1800s and you wore cotton clothes and you put sugar in your tea, you are absolutely implicated.
Yeah.
Even if you didn't, you know, actually invest in the slave trade. And so that was really helpful. And we then started to share that story with African and Caribbean Christians in the city to say, well, what are we going to do about this?
Right.
And we're on the journey now, responding to the things they asked and that they wanted us to do. And that will eventually result in, I hope, 2 significant arts commissions. But in the meantime, then we were ready to work with Gloria to produce this beautiful memorial, which is big and solid and permanent.
Right, and at the center of the front doors.
At the center of the front doors. And there are a couple of things. If we stand up,
Yes.
I can tell you a little bit more about it. So first of all, you can see it's a memorial to John Isaac. And it talks about the fact that he was one of at least 4,500 African people whose lives enriched those of Thomas and John Daniel. And talks about the abolition piece. There are a couple of things about this monument which I really, really love. One is that the planners enabled us to put in the words Black Lives Matter.
Yes, I know. It's the
yesterday.
first.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I really wondered whether that would get
Right,
past the planning
yeah.
process, but it sits very definitely in a period in history, and for me that's very powerful. And the second thing, which is a little in joke, is that these gold seed pods are from a plant that grows in a slave graveyard in the Caribbean, and it's called woman's tongue. And the reason that Gloria, who commissioned this piece, wanted this plant was not just because of the graveyard connection, but also because at the time this monument was put in, there was a woman dean,
Yes.
there was a woman bishop,
Right.
there was a woman who carved this, Marcia Mel Bennett, and it was a woman who commissioned it.
Yes.
And there was something, I think, around that it takes a woman to get a job done in Gloria's thinking. So this has been here since last October, and it's a real joy to be able to show people from the communities that we mean what we say about being a place that tells the truth, that knows our own complicity, and that wants to make a difference. And I have seen more than one person stand in front of this in tears. So it's been a very powerful witness to part of the work that we're trying to do here.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I found most interesting about our walk earlier is that you're also, your background is in art. And just as the person who's responsible for this great artistic place, I I wonder if you have, any last words to say about how that artistic training, helped prepare you to make aesthetic and ethical and other kinds of decisions for the cathedral.
I think it's one of the things that makes this job such fun.
Yeah.
Because I love a project, and so that sense in which you can do small things like this, or buying some new vestments, or we've had new signage everywhere in the building, which just changes that kind of outward visual thing. Says we're a bit more contemporary than you might expect. We're more diverse than you might think. We have a welcome sign, which I'll show you on the way out, which talks about who is welcome in this building, and it's and it talks about whether you're gay or straight or trans, whether you came by skateboard or in a wheelchair, and we've really tried to kind of do that piece. So with all the other responsibilities, the pastoral care, the finance, just the sheer quality and quantity of stakeholders, every now and again just being able to have some fun, hang out with some artists, that kind of, it helps me get up every day and enjoy the job a little bit more.
Well, it's helped me understand what the position is and what we need to be as deans in order to be more effective. I'm so grateful to you. This is Mandy Ford. She's the Dean of Bristol Cathedral in the UK. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California. Thanks for watching More Good News.